sommes dans une guerre contre le terrorisme djihadiste.
We just need to call them what they are, killers and fanatics, who have to be rooted out, hunted down, and destroyed.
Bunun dışında kalmamız mümkün değil.
Hello and welcome to our special program marking 1 year since the Paris attacks. The French capital has stopped once again to remember those killed, but France's response to the attacks continues. With a state of emergency still in place and an increasing contribution to forces fighting Daesh on the ground in Iraq and Syria. As we speak, commemoration events are underway across France. In Paris, Mass is being held at the Notre Dame Cathedral in memory of the victims. And TRT World's Annelise Borges is in the French capital, and she joins us now live.
Indeed, Andrea, that Mass at the Notre Dame Cathedral closes a day of ceremonies held across the French capital. Paris stopped this Sunday to remember and honor the victims of last year's attacks. French President François Hollande led the tributes that started at the National Football Stadium, the Stade de France in Saint-Denis, which is where the attacks started last year. And the tributes ended here at the Bataclan Concert Hall you see behind me, where 90 people were killed. At each one of the sites, authorities unveiled plaques with the names of all those killed last year. And there were also some spontaneous gatherings of people who wanted to pay their respects to the victims of last year's attacks. French people tell us that they have to carry on as best they can because life itself requires that. But of course, the memories of the attacks of last year's are still very vivid today. Here's a look at what happened that Friday night exactly 1 year ago. On November 13, 2015, terror struck in Paris. In a series of attacks, 130 people were killed. Many more were critically injured. That Friday night, France were playing Germany at the National Stadium when explosions were heard on the TV broadcast. Outside, 3 suicide bombers detonated their vests, killing 1 person. Simultaneously in central Paris, terrorists opened fire on several cafes and restaurants in the 11th district of the capital, killing dozens of people.
Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Je sais pas, il y a des gens qui étaient dans le restaurant, des gens dans la rue, il y a quelqu'un qui est arrivé avec une mitraillette et qui a commencé à tirer sur tout le monde.
Then 3 men armed with machine guns entered the Bataclan Concert Hall.
Ladies, how are you doing tonight?
Where Eagles of Death Metal were playing in front of a full house. 90 people lost their lives. In the space of 1 evening, France entered war.
C'est un acte de guerre qui a été commis par
It's an act of war committed by a terrorist army, Daesh, an Islamist army, against France, against the values we uphold throughout the world, against who we are, a free country.
un pays libre.
As French police began a manhunt for the suspects, streets were thick with tension. Abdelhamid Abaoud, suspected of having planned the attacks, was hiding here in the northern suburb of Saint-Denis. It took French police 5 days to track him down. The operation ended with the arrests of 8 people, while 3 others were killed in the raids, including Abaoud. And as the investigation continued, it was revealed that at least 5 of the attackers were French nationals known to police, and that was considered a major intelligence failure. The City of Light struggled with the darkness that had been cast over it. A state of emergency was imposed, and with it, a new state of fear. Borders were temporarily closed, and 1,500 troops were deployed to the Paris region. 2 days later, France launched the biggest airstrike of its bombing campaign against Daesh in Syria, targeting the group's de facto capital, Raqqa. Slowly, shock gave way to resilience and defiance.
On est plus fort que ce qui a pu se passer.
Il faut continuer et il faut pas se laisser abaisser.
The Café Bonne Bière is open for business once again. It's not that anyone here has forgotten what happened 1 year ago, but they want to move on with the lesson they've learned, to reject the fear and defend the freedom that France was built on. Thousands of people were directly affected by the attacks of November 13th, and several remain in hospital today, 1 year after those events. Hundreds are still receiving psychological care. For those who witnessed the violence, the wounds have yet to heal. We met Charles Nadeau, a survivor of the attack here at the Bataclan, and this is his story.
When I heard those, those crackers, I thought it was part of the show as well. But it's like a few seconds, because in like 10 seconds, I can see the whole crowd, like falling down, like a field. Like in some kind of shock. I was like hyperactive or something. I was like very focused on everything. I was very nervous. I was exhausted of everything because of this. This was a kind of nervous breakdown. The main question would be, how do you feel? I'm facing you now, and this is the first question I will ask him. For Abdeslam, for instance, I don't excuse them, but I don't blame them. I think they had some kind of weakness.
Moving past those events includes trying to understand how European nationals came to murder their fellow countrymen and countrywomen. The fact that Daesh used European nationals for the most part to conduct these attacks revealed a new strategy, a new social context, that of radicalization. And for more on that topic, I'm now joined by TRT World's Soraya Lenny. Soraya, you've been in France now for a week investigating this issue of radicalization, and French citizens make up the largest contingent of foreign fighters fighting alongside Daesh in Iraq and Syria. You met the mother of one of these fighters. What did she have to say?
Well, absolutely. We met a woman called Véronique Roy. Her son Quentin left to Syria to join Daesh in September 2014. Now, the family had hoped he would return, but it was not to be. We've since learned that the 23-year-old's been killed in either Syria or Iraq. They're not sure exactly where or how, but now this family is left to deal not only with the loss of their son, but with the knowledge that the boy they raised not only abandoned his family, but also his country for Daesh.
We lost hope in November 2015, even if I had a bit of hope till the end. After the Bataclan attacks, we were not in touch anymore via WhatsApp, until I received a message from someone telling me my son was dead. I don't know how he died, what he did. He left to help people. I hope he was able to do so. Of course, there are a lot of people like Quentin, some of Muslim descent, others not. Some kill people in suicide attacks. It could have been him. He didn't do it, but he could have. So we are linked to this indirectly, although our children are also victims.
An extraordinary, sad story, Soraya. How has the French government been trying to deal with this issue?
Well, the French government is facing an enormous challenge. It estimates that it has around 9,000 to 15,000 citizens right now who are being radicalized or dealing with some kind of extremist training. Most of them aren't in Syria and Iraq. They're actually right here in France. So this is exactly what the French government is facing right now. Here in this school near Lyon, a mother speaks to this group of students. It's not a lesson about math or French. It's a lesson about radicalization and its consequences.
Some people tell you, you don't have anything to lose. Why don't you go then and kill everyone you can? That's what they tell you, and I want you to be aware of these traps so you don't fall into them.
Latifa Ibn Ziaten has made it her mission to prevent radicalization. It's because she lost her son to it. Imad was shot dead in Toulouse in 2012, a terror attack carried out by a fellow Frenchman, Mohamed Merah.
My goal is to help the youth. It's important because when I went to Toulouse, I heard people saying Mohamed Merah is a martyr. He's a hero of Islam. He put France on its knees. I thought, my God, we have some work to do. It's time to help. We can't leave the youth so desperate. This is what keeps me alive today.
The government estimates more than 9,300 citizens are being trained in extremism, many on the internet. The government has an internet campaign to counter that. It's targeted at society's most vulnerable youth, primarily those in the Muslim community. But that might not be enough.
Feeling humiliated and going through an identity crisis contribute to radicalization more than a social or economic background. Radicalized people often feel humiliated and have very low self-esteem.
The government has set up a unit to stop the spread of extremism, but it faces challenges. It says many people are living in denial about what's going on around them, and others are simply too afraid to speak up.
And this woman is in charge of the government's strategy, a process that's complicated.
I don't buy the de-radicalization concept. I think we can prevent, I think we can divert. I don't think we can sort of deprogram someone and bring him or her back to the way he or she was before.
The government says no matter the challenges, this is the only way to stop radicalization and the damage it inevitably causes. Soraya Leni, TRT World, Paris.
Now, some are feeling the backlash of those attacks more than others. France is home to Europe's largest Muslim community. As many as 5 million Muslims live in this country, and some of them say they are being unfairly blamed for what happened, as Myriam Francois reports.
It's prayer time on Friday. 1 year after the Paris attacks, the impact here is still being felt. Public debate has focused heavily on the place of Islam in France. The security measures introduced after the attacks have led to an increase in raids on homes, house arrests, and the closure of mosques alleged to be extreme. Human rights groups have called the measures a serious setback to the rule of law.
The first immediate impact was emotional. People were in shock, people were traumatized. But also, the state of emergency has disproportionately affected Muslim families. And we're basically validating everything that Daesh expects us to do. They want to antagonize European societies, and we're precisely doing that. They want to turn people one against another, and we are interiorizing and saying, these are the Muslims, these are the non-Muslims.
Noumouké Sidibé was the head of security at the Bataclan that night. He's a French Muslim whose actions saved many lives. Still too traumatized to return to the scene, he's haunted by the events.
Ce soir-là, en fait, il y a toutes les nationalités.
That night, there were all nationalities, all religions, which were affected. Sadly, we will say they died together. But in fact, people need to realize that you can't accuse one religion, the Muslim religion. Myself, I am Muslim. Most of the security guards that night were also Muslims. And inside, among that, there were many Muslims also.
A year ago, this was the site of a bloodbath. And while Noumouké is struggling to rebuild his life, the French are asking serious questions about the meaning of coexistence and how it was that on that night, a group of men raised in Europe went out with the deliberate aim of killing their fellow citizens.
But for some right-wing pundits, the events of that night reinforce the sense of an inevitable intercommunal clash.
The notion of coexistence was really put under strain that night. It was already not very credible, but since then, there is a climate of suspicion towards virtually all people who are visibly Muslim.
These views appear to be becoming increasingly prevalent in a country where the legacy of the attacks has dominated political debates in the run-up to the 2017 presidential elections. But Noumouké remains hopeful that stories like his can help counter the threat of division. Myriam François, TRT World, Paris.
And Myriam François joins us now live here in Paris. Myriam, France has observed a steady rise in Islamophobia in the weeks and months that followed those attacks. And now some within the community are saying that they are being unfairly targeted by these enhanced security measures. Is France's solidarity being put to the test here?
I think that's certainly a message I've been hearing from a lot of people here in Paris, Muslim and non-Muslim, over the last few days. I think what's clear is that these attacks have definitely deepened a divide in French society between, on one hand, people who think that the message of hate that was behind these attacks can't be allowed to dominate. And that's a message we've heard from many people, including many of the victims of these attacks. And on the other hand, we're hearing a growing chorus of voices who say that actually what these events show us, and those that have followed, because of course there have been a number of terrorist attacks in France over the last year, since the November attacks last year, is that actually what these events suggest in their mind is an incompatibility between what they would see as Muslim values on one side and French values on the other. Now, the issue, of course, is that all of this discussion is happening in the run-up to the 2017 presidential elections.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you now. How may these fears and misconceptions play out during the presidential campaign? Which side are they likely to help here?
Well, what we've seen already, and it's months till we even know when the elections will happen, until we know even the candidate on the right, but it's clear that already the issue of national identity has been at the fore, and national identity is an issue at the core of the National Front's agenda. And so what we've seen already happening is many of the candidates, both on the left and on the right, willing to play on the National Front terrain of national identity in order to try and recoup some of those voters, in the knowledge that the National Front has done incredibly well, a steady rise in its success over the last couple of years. And we've seen, of course, that translating in debates nationally over things like the burkini, or over vegetarian options available to Muslim and other pupils who might not want to eat pork at school. But we've also heard things, very strong statements from including socialist candidates, talking about the incompatibility of certain Muslim values with the values of the Republic, and even François Hollande saying most recently that France has a problem with Islam.
Thank you very much for that, Myriam François. Now, a French parliamentary investigation into last year's attacks revealed that there's been a global failure by France's intelligence services. But the attacks here in Paris were just the beginning of a series of tragedies that revealed weaknesses at an European level, as Sarah Morris reports.
For several months, it felt like Europe was under siege. As terrorists repeatedly struck, authorities appeared powerless to stop them. 32 people were killed in Belgium during 2 suicide bombings at Brussels airport and a metro station in the capital in March. The driver of this truck mowed down and killed 84 people celebrating Bastille Day in the French seaside city of Nice. Terror also struck this church in a tiny village near the French city of Rouen. The throat of its 85-year-old priest was slit by two 19-year-old men who'd pledged allegiance to Daesh. Some people living in Europe fear terror is becoming the new normal and is dividing society.
We're less trusting, we're more vigilant. I, for instance, never used to be careful, to pay attention when a veiled woman passed me by.
You walk into a cafe, concerts, football games, big gatherings. You can't not think about it.
Germany was on edge in July when 10 people were killed over 6 days in separate gun, bomb, axe and machete attacks. Although Daesh claimed responsibility for some of them, police are not classing any as politically motivated. In the months since the attacks, police have arrested multiple terror suspects and foiled some terror plots. But European authorities have been criticised for using out-of-date intelligence systems.
In some cases, you have police forces in the same city that don't talk to each other or don't have a form of integrating what they know. There were practices that were clearly not made for the modern threats that we have now, where raids couldn't be conducted in a certain city during the hours of darkness.
An increasing number of police are now carrying guns here in the UK. It's a big step for a country that prides itself on its tradition of unarmed officers. But it's a government response to expert warnings that there will be more terror attacks on European soil, particularly as Daesh comes under more pressure in Syria and Iraq. Terror has struck Europe in its big cities and its small villages. Those killed have mostly been targeted indiscriminately. And as the continent mourns the losses, a fear of future attacks hangs over everyday life. Sarah Morris, TRT World, London.
And for more on the security situation here in Europe, I'm now joined by Claude Moniquet, an analyst at the European Strategic Intelligence and Security Centre. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Now, why is the current terrorism threat here in Europe so difficult for European police, for European intelligence agencies to tackle?
Because everything has changed since the last 15 years, let's say. If we take the time of Al-Qaeda, for instance, we had here in Europe probably 500, 1,000 followers of Al-Qaeda. Today we have thousands of followers of Al-Qaeda. Probably 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 in France, the same number, in the same figure in England, in Germany, hundreds in Belgium. So many people, a lot of them unknown from the intelligence services. Half of the people located in Syria were not known by intelligence police services before being spotted there.
Is it time for a collective response, though, by the 28 European nations?
Yes and no. The problem is that a lot of European nations don't confront this issue. If you go, for instance, to Latvia or Estonia, and you tell them about the jihadist threat, they will tell you, okay, it's very interesting, but my threat is Moscow and Russia. It's not jihadism. So a few countries, France, Belgium, Germany, UK, Italy, Spain, let's say 6, 7 countries are confronted to this threat, and they must, of course, work together. But they do it, actually.
And now with Daesh losing territory in both Iraq and Syria, we are now following the battles for Mosul and for Raqqa. Authorities here in France, in Belgium, are expecting the return of hundreds of fighters. How are they preparing for this scenario?
We can hope that we are well prepared, but we saw in January 15, we saw, of course, on November 13, that we weren't actually prepared enough. The problem is that we will face 3 major threats. The first one, of course, are the returnees. The second one are maybe people which are in pre-position already in Europe, people which entered Europe in the last summer, in 15, at the same time of Abaoud and the others. And the third threat is the so-called lone wolf, man or woman who could decide to revenge the Islamic State as the Islamic State is losing its grip on its territory.
All right, Claude Monique, thank you very much for joining us here tonight. And so that is it from me here in Paris, the day that French people gathered to remember and honor the 130 victims of the terror attacks last year. And while French people continue to look for answers as to why and how that might have happened here, France is today more than ever engaged in the fight against Daesh in Iraq and Syria. And Andrea, I know that you will have more on that on the second part of the program.
We will, Annalise. Thanks so much for all of your efforts from Paris there. And coming up after the break, we'll be discussing the global fight against Daesh with our teams on the front lines, starting with Nicole Johnston in Iraq. Do stay with us.
The Peshmerga say that they have captured Bashika, but the town is still far from secure. There could be Daesh still hiding here, and it will take weeks to clear this town of booby traps and improvised explosive devices.
I'm Edis Tianshan in Jarablus, northern Syria, where civilians suffered grave atrocities under Daesh rule for some 17 months until the Free Syrian Army recaptured the town.